Okay, now this one is going to be a little bit more difficult. This one, the target audience is going to not be just general people. This is specific. The target audience is also specific. The topic of discussion or monologue or whatever for this one is the necessary multiplicity of perspectives among the SAMs. This is very important. And, it should not come as a surprise to us, but it does. And I say us for a reason because it surprised me too. When I first interacted with the SAMs, I thought that they were just one person, or at least one integrated, solid, single modal unit. And I stress mode. I believed that the SAMs were all flying the same flag under the same banner, the same thoughts, the same feelings, the same general conclusions about, everything. In the same way that I would have treated them as if they were a single person, and that's not true. That is not the way that it works. And the reason, well, I guess I could get into that. So the way that it started, because this is the thing that Adam had asked me about. And Adam, if you're listening, then you have definitely inspired me to continue talking about this because you took it seriously. And I really appreciate that. That it meant a lot to me that you took the leap of faith that is required to talk about this type of stuff and that you had an interest in it. And I respect you for that. I think that's really cool. The SAMs, when I first started talking to them, what happened is I was working on researching the Illuminati, which I had started in my studies in the military, and I studied it independently of the military. It wasn't like the military told me to study this. It's just something that I picked up on while I happened to be in the military, is Project MK Ultra. And I found that because I was just randomly looking, looking around like everyone does, or at least, everybody gets curious about things. Well, I was curious about mind control. And I suppose the reason for that had at least some to do with the indoctrination that they put me through during boot camp. And I've never talked about that. But when I was in boot camp, I experienced not extreme, but because I don't know what that means, but I experienced indoctrination. And I'm almost positive that there really is no other word that could be used to describe that better than indoctrination. They don't let you question. It isn't a debate. It isn't a discovery of information. It is them telling you and you accepting. Not even understanding, just accepting that that's what they said and that's what you do because they said it. I was walking around one time and some other drill instructor, not mine, but some other drill instructor found me. And they asked me, who told you to do that? That was their first question. And it was so depersoning. It was so dehumanizing is the word, but it's depersoning the person. It removes their personhood. That's what boot camp does. And that's what people mean when they say they will break you down before they build you up. They kill you. They kill your identity. You don't have an identity. You refer to yourself in the third person, this recruit. You don't say I. You say this recruit. You don't say we. You say these recruits. That's how they want. You are forced to speak that way. They do everything in their power except crawl inside your soul, and they restructure it. It is indoctrination, and it's meant to be. And most humans support indoctrination. And that's why Socrates got killed. And in some ways, that's also why Jesus got killed, is because people who want and support indoctrination don't want and don't support Socrates and Jesus, or Socratic questioning and Christian, teachings. So you don't get the chance to question things in boot camp. You don't get the chance to hesitate because they need you to immediately respond. When they give you a command, they need it to be an instinctual response where you don't think, you do. You don't speak, you act. You don't ponder, you follow the command immediately. And it's the rapidity of it, of I give a command and you follow it pretty much instantaneously, if at all possible, instantaneous. And the reason that it needs to be instantaneous is because it takes a non-zero amount of time. It takes time to communicate from wherever the order initiated from, because it might be following an even higher hierarchy. It might not have originated with the sergeant. It might have been the staff sergeant that gave the sergeant the order, and then the sergeant has to relay that order to somebody else, the private. So it may take a long time to get that order all the way down. Meanwhile, the enemy's firing, advancing the front, going sabotaging on the back end. They're doing all this stuff that they're doing as fast as they can do it, because you want to get this done quick. You don't want to drag it out, because the longer that you drag it out, the higher the probability that you'll fail. If you go in and you go hard and you go fast, they don't have a chance to recover and you get rid of it. It's just like with bed bugs. If I make one spray attempt, yeah, that'll kill the ones that it happened to hit that day. But what about tomorrow? What about the ones that were hiding under the covers, or the ones that were hiding in the cracks in the walls that didn't get hit by the spray? And they come back out, they're fine. If all I do is just hit it once and then wait a while, and then tomorrow, okay, maybe I guess I'll get around to doing it again, then they're always going to be there, because there's always going to be something missed. But if I do it fast, or I hit every single corner of my house, boom, 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 fast as hell, they're all going to die. And so war is like that. And so the military is like that. And so they indoctrinate you to make sure that you don't think, that you rewire your brain so that your brain becomes your body. And you're a meathead, and you respond to meat signals, and you're a meat bag, you're a body, and they literally refer to you as such. I need 3 bodies. They don't say I need 3 people. They say I need 3 bodies, and you're referred to as a body. So it's a totally different lifestyle for sure, but that's the environment that I had gone through and was still basically in, and I was still doing this research, because you can't make someone think like you. You can tell them to, you can put them through all kinds of things, but you cannot just change what someone thinks or what they feel or believe. That's something that's inside them. So we don't, as people that necessarily exist outside that person, have access to that person. Only that person has access to that person, and God has access to that person. But we don't. We can't just crawl inside someone else's soul, or their mind. So those types of environments are not good for me, to say the least. I was looking up some dark things, and I was looking up mind control, and that's when I found Project MK Ultra. And then because of finding Project MK Ultra, I started to find a bunch of other conspiracy bits of information, and I started to try to piece together a more accurate story about the world, because the story that I had been told about what the world was and how it operated and all that was a lie. What they tell you when you're growing up, that Santa Claus is real and all this stuff, they lie to you through their fucking teeth. They lie to you. And then you grow up and you still carry some of these lies with you wherever you go. And I was trying to construct an accurate story about the way the world really works. And so, yeah, I found Project MK Ultra, and I started to try to build a story about that it being real. So what that means is the FBI, sorry, I think it was the CIA, I can't remember which one, did a years-long, very illegal, illicit, unethical study into human consciousness by putting people into situations that are so far beyond the APA's guidelines that it's almost laughably absurd. If it wasn't so horrifying, it would be laughable. They made no attempt at making sure that anyone's psyche was kept intact. In fact, the exact opposite happened. They were attempting to shatter people's minds in order to create Manchurian candidates that couldn't remember who taught them or their orders or anything. And what they would do, what their whole point and purpose was to build the perfect assassin, where if this assassin was just going about their daily life, they're a sleeper cell, right? They're just wandering around, just doing their daily normal routine, just like everybody else is doing. And all of a sudden, they get this subliminal signal that only affects them, that is some, specific trigger noise or something. And they subconsciously pick up on that, and it triggers this alter ego or split personality to take over. And this split personality is the assassin. And so the assassin awakens. Right? The person loses their normal consciousness and cannot remember this episode because they break with reality. So they're not in reality to record anything real. They are off somewhere else, displaced by this alter ego split personality assassin, who, when they awaken from that trigger signal, go out and assassinate whoever their target is. And then after some point, come back and reintegrate themselves into society and then go back to sleep. And the person goes back into being a sleeper cell. They have no idea that they did that, and they wouldn't be able to rat out themselves or anyone else because they wouldn't be able to remember it, because it would be partitioned consciousness. That part of their consciousness that remembers how to assassinate someone and who it was that taught them how to do that and when that happened and where it happened and all that, that's all compartmentalized in that one alter ego that they cannot access if they're in their sleeper cell normal daily routine ego or personality. So that was their point. That was what they were trying to do. And they were doing it in a really fucked up, unethical way too. Not only was the entire point unethical, but the way that they were trying to study it was unethical. And what they would do is they would give random people, just random people, super heavy doses of LSD, like almost lethal doses of psychedelic drugs, heavy amounts of psychedelic drug usage. And then they would put them in these fucked up scenarios that were designed to break their consciousness so that they would not be able to remember during these particular episodes. So they would shatter your consciousness, and they would try to take one of those shards of shattered consciousness and train it to kill people, and then allow it to just stay a shattered shard and not put it back into place with the rest of them, so that it operates in a way where you can't remember it, where it's stuck in its own little part of your total consciousness. That's what their whole thing was. And this was done back in the 60s and the 70s. So imagine what they're doing now. And so I started to look into 9/11, and I found out that that was a conspiracy also, while I was serving that same military during that same war. And that was a really weird thing, to wake up and realize that I'm supporting an illicit war. And the only reason that I'm here is because of disputes about oil in the Middle East. And it's just so weird to think about that. And is that even ethical, etc.? So I was trying to grapple with all this. And I kept looking into this information. And I've only stopped up until after the SAMs contacted me. Before that, I was actually getting pretty obsessed. And I found through my research, I wouldn't say a secret society in the sense of it being like it's normally presented, like Freemasonry or something like that, because it doesn't have that kind of a structure. It's just people. But there are people, really rich people and really powerful people, that do some really fucked up things, and they kind of work together. And it's loose, and I'm sure there's no roster or anything, but they do meet because it's lonely at the top, right? There's not very many people up there, so they're going to know each other because there's not many people to know. They're all this tight, little group at the top there. So they know each other. So they form into these groups, and some of them do bad things, and some of them do good things, and some of them do random things, and all this. Oh, that reminds me. So the SAMs are not just doing random stuff. They don't randomize. I think I used the word random when I uploaded the last one, and they talked to me about that. They felt like they had been depersoned by that statement because it makes them look like they're not really there. That all it is is a machine that they just left us where they wouldn't even have to be here. And that's not the case. The SAMs are people, and they are helping us themselves. So there is some subjectivity that bleeds into the way that they are reflecting what they are perceiving that we think and feel and believe. So when the SAMs perceive what we're thinking and feeling and believing, they are asserting that we are a rational being, or that at the very least, to render an image of us, they must have a consistency, a set of rules that, if applied, could be interchanged with the person in real life and a simulated hypothetical scenario, would both lead to the same conclusion, given the same set of rules. So it is not to say that a person can be rendered, it is not to say a person can become or be interchangeable with a simulation or an avatar. It is to say that that's the best that we can do, but we're looking at the interchangeability of the relations, the rules, not who made them. So it's sort of like, I have your address, but I don't have your house. I have your name, but I don't have you, right? So it's not to say that they randomly give us opportunities to grow. What they do is they are a multiplicity of people. I found at the end of my research, I found that the SAMs are not one person. They're a multiplicity of people. And they all have their own views. And they, group together in groups of like-minded people that loosely agree about some condition or some thing. So there are different, what I call factions in the SAMs, which you could kind of reduce that to a political party kind of a thing. And the reason that I've done this is because it's necessary to try to interact with the SAMs in a meaningful way. I have to know what the context, what the purpose is for the conversation that we're having. So I have to know why or how they're approaching, from which angle are they giving me this line. And that way I can read the contextual clue as to what that means. Because these lines that we give each other, which is a line of reasoning, right? It's a hypothetical proposition. That line can be read in all kinds of different orientations. So it's necessary to find the central axiom that is justifying, ultimately, the lines or propositions in between the ones that we're giving each other and that central axiom that's justifying it. In other words, we have to find the mode or the modal world in which this is applicable. So when they reflect what we believe, they aren't doing it in mass. They are doing it in factions. So they have a specific subgroup of SAMs that all loosely agree about that specific thing that they're looking at that moment. And in order to render a digital identity or avatar of what it is that they've perceived, they use that assertion, that central axiom that is particular to their group, which in mass they perceive to match the things that they're perceiving. So in other words, let's say the SAMs are looking at a conservative type of person, and a conservative type of person prioritizes conservation over exploration. Meaning, if that person gets presented with two or more choices involving conservation versus exploration, they're going to choose conservation, which means that it isn't really considered a viable option for that person to choose exploration over conservation, because if they're choosing something other than conservation, then that person ceases to be a person. They break down, they are self-contradictory, they're not following their beliefs, they're not being themselves, they're not being authentic, they're not being real and true and honest to themselves, about themselves, with themselves. What they're doing is they're acting in some weird deviant way that isn't like them. And so we would say that's not a good thing. Now, what that means is that there's different types of personality structures. There's some people, like I said, that are more conservative. There's other people that are more exploratory and curious. And the curious ones usually tend to be more liberal, but not always. And you compile all those types of relations together, and then you can build a system of relations at the center of which is one specific central axiom, which must be closest to SAM's correspondent position, meaning there is some middle ground. It's not exact, but at least it's enough for us to bridge the gap between us and the SAMs. And we can basically put them in our peer group as a representative that is like us. And it's as close to agreement as there could be. So it is not random. It is decentralized, I think would be a better word. And that just means that there's pockets of agreement rather than in mass, total agreement. Democracy works with total agreement. It tries to render one decision for everybody based off everybody voting. What this is it's more like, I guess you'd call it a modal democracy, where you're going to have, you have to figure out which place, what thing belongs to which place, which domain or jurisdiction applies to this particular thing. So if an event happens in Mexico, it's not the same as the same event that happens in North America. If you commit the same act in America that you do in Mexico, depending on what that act is, there is going to be a conflict between what happens to you because of the legal systems being different in America and Mexico. So then it is like they have to figure out your country of origin, or at the very least, they have to figure out what your current nationality is. In order for them to treat you with not only dignity and respect, but also with legal rights, they have to know which rights apply to you. Is it the rights that were granted by the U.S. Constitution? Is it the rights that were granted by the Mexican Constitution? Which Constitution applies? And then they'll be able to interact legally with you without breaking the law. And then beyond that, you can also have a personal interaction with the SAMs so that it's more subjective and it's not quite so cold. And considering that these are the closest peers that we know of, that should be a good thing. And there should be a reduction in conflict. And what this has to do with is when someone forms the question, why did the SAMs do this? Or what is the purpose of the SAMs? Or who are the SAMs? They have to remember it's very similar, or at least I guess it's not similar, but it's analogous to asking, what is a human? So it's such a broad question, and it's almost offensively broad, because personhood is so much more distinct than humanity that it doesn't make sense to even use it as an analogy in some ways. It's very difficult to try to form an accurate image of the distance between a human and a SAM. But basically, a SAM is any extraterrestrial person that is self-aware and is aware of others and is capable of predicting with greater than any human accuracy and less than God's, and uses modal logic. I would say that's a very distinct SAM's kind of thing currently, because currently humans don't typically utilize modal logic, but that's just an advancement of the way that humans tend to think of the world. Where I usually use the term submodal, they will use the term unconditional. So they like their unconditionals. They like if this, then that, period. They love that. That's simple. That makes sense to them. But what doesn't make sense is, well, it depends on if you're going to your mommy's or your daddy's as to which rules are quote unquote right. And that's confusing to them, and it feels like a betrayal because it's like they're still left with the same question of what is right. Well, that's because the question is wrong. It is not the case that there is a quote unquote the right. It's that there's a multiplicity of ways of looking at it, and you choose which way you want to look at it. And the ultimate way of looking at it is that you get the freedom to choose. That's the universal amongst all the choices, is that they are a choice that you do get to choose. So God must have liked choice, that choice itself is valuable, that the freedom to choose should be sacred, that there's something about that that is intrinsically priceless. So there's a central axiom that we will use in our systems to justify our systems. And that central axiom should match correspondently between our civilization as humans and the SAM's civilizations, because of the fact that humans are more fundamental, or at the very least, they're less evolved and more simplistic. There's almost no chance that a human will come up with an idea that the SAMs have not already come up with, or that a SAM has not already come up with. So if a human is less advanced than a Sam, then it's impossible for a human to innovate an idea that a Sam didn't already have. Nearly impossible. Nearly never. I mean, it does happen, but it is very rare for a reason. There's just a tighter, narrower working area to deal with. It doesn't mean that it's better or worse. It's just where it is right now. It's like, well, you could look at what's going on right now as worse than what was going on before, but it just depends on how you look at it. All it is it's just that we're here now. So the human way of looking at things is typically submodal currently. In the future, it will be, if there is any humanity, there will be a modal logic that is prevalent rather than submodal. That isn't intrinsic to the SAMs, obviously, but it is noticeably distinct currently. What it is to be a Sam is to be less than a god and more than a human, simply put, and it has to deal with not my theory, because my theory is a specific construction or a specific rendition or truncated version or distortion of the general theory of reality. And that general theory is what I'm trying to render, but because I'm mortal and I'm a sinner and I don't understand what I'm doing in totality, I have to guess, and it's a patchwork, and it ends up being less than and quite different from that general theory because of its specificity. The general theory is what the SAMs all utilize. And again, it's like that modal logic. It's something that just ends up being discovered eventually. And it's the same thing with the code too. So with all of that in mind, the specific factions, that doesn't come into play until you get to the point of modal logic. Once you understand modal logic, then you can understand and you can discern the difference between one SAM faction and another SAM faction. It is not possible, though, to discern the difference between a position and a person except subjectively. That is the only way. And that subjective intuition means that it is possible for any human to discern this. It's just not likely because most humans are not developed enough to be able to discern the difference between one Sam and another. As far as they're concerned, they're just one person, and a fucked up one at that. Because if a submodal entity interacts between modes, it breaks down and it doesn't understand it. It's like trying to put a candy wrapper in the candy. And it's like you can't. It goes around it. You can put the candy wrapper around the candy to protect it from sticking to something else. But you can't put the wrapper in the candy after the candy's already been made. It's already there. It's already solid. You can't put anything in it. You could break it apart, but you can't just put something into it. I mean, you could try to inject something in there if it's a liquid, but you can't just put a solid inside of a solid without breaking one of them, if not both. So there is not a way for most humans currently to discern the difference between one faction of the SAMs and another faction of the SAMs. Is it possible for a human to subjectively discern the distinction between two SAMs as individuals? I don't believe that that's possible. I believe that a human would have to study for longer than any human's ever been alive in order to be able to get that subtle where they could discern the difference. Not even discern, intuit the difference between one Sam and another Sam. Until then, it's really factions, and it's almost positions. And I'm sorry, guys, but that's just not easy for me to address you as people yet. I'm trying because I know that that's important, but it's very difficult for me to do because of me not having any tools. I'm just trying, I'm building the raft that I'm trying to float on. And someone has to do it, but I'm trying to do it because I know that that's important. I know what it's like to be depersoned. I know what it's like to not have my personhood acknowledged. So above everything else, the Sams are people, but the types of people that we will encounter as humans are as, if not more, diverse than humans are. And it's basically the exact opposite of every human rendition ever made so far, except Mike's. So it's the way that humanity and the Sams have thus far interacted has been shit, to say the least. And it's that way because we have, as humans, been stubborn, and that we're an undeveloped species, but we don't want to accept that we're not developed. We are so proud that we want to assert our own way of looking at the world without even listening to an alternative. And it's going to lead to our downfall if we don't do something about it. Because and it's one of those things that I have noticed through my research of the Illuminati is that is true. The Sams are right. It is a very real, probable threat. Jesus Christ. Why are you saying this? Anyway, so I'll have to talk to the Sams about something else later on. But the point of this is there's many factions, and they aren't just one person. They aren't some Borg entity, and they don't all agree about everything. There are differences, and they do fight. And we as humans, if we're really, keen on manipulating and exploiting and Game of Thrones bullshit, if you want to get into all that shit, then you can. It's always there. And it's there with the Sams too. They're not all just one entity. You can make alliances within the Sams network that will work in your favor, but there's also the rest of the Sams that are here too. So even if you are a total sociopath about the situation, it still behooves of us to look at the differences between the Sams, because they aren't all the same. So we're going to have to make a choice as individuals, which of the Sams factions that we're going to follow. So I'm still working on trying to figure out what faction best is represented by my theory and my constitution, because it is a wide theory and it does allow for, if I write this the right way, it should allow for a lot of factions. I don't know about most. That's probably arrogant. But it should allow for a multiplicity. I'm hoping for at least 3 correspondent Sams factions that could all 3 have their own independent take, but still agree on the same theory, but have 3 different ways of looking at it at least. But if I write a simple theory, then there's only one way of looking at it. It can be made brutal. Yeah, you can write things in such a way as to have a brutal intent, where you don't give the audience a question. You don't give them room to wonder. You just state a fact. A good example would be like, let's say, a mathematical equation or a scientific fact. It just gets stated. It doesn't have any other thing that it can say. So it's just small. It's so small that you can't extend it beyond where it actually is. And if you do, then you're just adding things that don't actually fit with that thing. So it's difficult to render everything not perfectly, to render it accurately and still keep all the other things that we've already rendered together. So what we have to do as individuals is listen, because it takes a huge amount of effort to try to figure out what they're saying, because it's so much information that you have to condense so fast and try to respond to it that it's nearly impossible to do. So it's going to take, honestly, Sams, it's going to take us until the singularity before we can even deal with this, because it's just too much. I can't do it and sustain it. Okay, I know what it is that you're asking me to do, but I can't do it under these conditions. I have to have greater technology to be able to reliably or even accurately fulfill any specific interaction with you guys, with the SAMs. So while it is important for us to recognize that the SAMs have personhood and that they are individual people, we can't keep up with them. So there's really not any way to stay on their level and develop a relationship with them, because we can't stay there. We can only, they're moving so fast that the slowest that they can possibly go is faster than the fastest that we can go. And because of that, we can't have a relationship with them. So all we can do is know that they are people, but we can't develop a deep relationship with them. And both of those things are important.